Internets, hello you lovelies. A lot of you have asked for this one. Let's talk about The Crow. Now, a bit of context. The Crow 2024 is the first ever Crow film I've seen personally since the original, out of a devout love for the original. But I did want to check this one out because I love James O'Barr's comics, and I did want to give it a chance. I'd love to see The Crow as more of an archetypal character like your Spider-Man, your Batman, your Bond, something that other people can put their artistic interpretation into while still being true to the foundation of the character. So the first film means the absolute world to me. It is one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. It is, I think, a perfect soundtrack, a perfect tone, so masterfully directed. I think that first film is so near perfect. I hadn't been able to watch any of the sequels, but I did, like I said, want to give this one a chance. But before we get into it, if you're new to this page, I do comic book news and comic book reviews, as well as movie news and movie reviews. So if you're here because you like comic book movies, please do subscribe. I'm trying to hit 36K by next month, mid-month. September 15th is my 36th birthday, and I want to hit 36K by my 36th birthday. So hopefully you join me on this page's journey. And if you don't want to stay, hit that like on your way out. Also, leave a comment below. Let me know what you think of the original Crow. Let me know what you thought of this Crow. This video drops the day the Crow is released because the embargo was literally a few hours before the movie's release. And we'll talk about why in just a moment. So, without further ado, The Crow. Okay, so the good news is it is not nearly as bad as a lot of people would have assumed from the trailer, which I did enjoy that trailer. The bad news is it's not The Crow, it's its own kind of gothic love story, which could have been a more interesting movie. So I think it'd be easier to crap on this movie. There's plenty to not like, but there's also plenty to like. And I'm sure this is the middle-of-the-road review that's going to get less people, in the comments and clicking, because the things on the internet that do well are, oh my god, I love this, or oh my god, I hate this, not a nuanced attempt at conversation. And this isn't the worst movie ever, but it's not one of the best movie ever, like The Crow, and that is going to cause it to be judged according to the original, which is what you get when you make a movie called The Crow.
How many people have you loved?
I'll never be alone.
Now, the movie itself, I think, is a really beautiful love story. I love that they spent about an entire third of this film, just on the love between Eric and Shelly. But if they'd called this movie The Crow and had it been another Crow besides Eric and Shelly, I would have been able to enjoy that love story and their journey more than just thinking about how, in the original Eric and Shelly, it's incredible how much their love means to you with limited screen time. So the problem wasn't in this movie's format. This problem wasn't even in this movie's decision to overcomplicate things, which we'll get to. The problem was you've got a character that in other sequels apparently has been other names, and you can have The Crow be passed on to other names, and the decision not to do that and to make it Eric and Shelly distracts from the film itself, because I kept thinking, oh, I love that we're really investing in their journey and their love story, and this is interesting, and I love their chemistry, and I love how passionate they are for each other, and I love how they met, and I love that this story ties into both of their journeys, and all of those things were true, but it's not Eric and Shelly, it's this new thing, and that's how I feel about the whole movie.
What's the first thing you liked about me?
I thought that you were quite brilliantly broken.
This movie is taking a very simple story, and that's not an insult, it's a compliment. What The Crow does simply is make a man's revenge about a sadness so strong he couldn't die. And there are obviously mystical elements. There are obviously things with The Crow that imply a certain otherworldliness and those things. But this movie adds so much of that and overcomplicates that it kind of weakens that.
I shouldn't have seen any of it.
Mild spoilers for The Crow, because it is hard to explain without light spoilers, but this won't ruin your experience of the film. It's not a spoiler in the sense that it gives things away. These are all things that are introduced early, so it isn't a third act spoiler. But the villain of the film, Danny Houston, is also magic adjacent, and thus it kind of undermines the magic and mysticism and mystery of our Crow. And then they also have this purgatory, this place between worlds that they go back to enough, that it spells things out enough, that instead of being a captivating, oh, this is just this powerful gothic love story, it's almost a, let's over-explain and dive into this world, which you've only been introduced after the love story, and now it's its own kind of separate thing. It feels very disjointed. And I don't think they needed all that. And I loved the love story, discounting the names, but then by the time it got to the second and third act, everything feels kind of muddled by overcomplicating things. And there's actually elements of the film where the Crow himself makes bargains that feel like they undermine the earlier love. And it also feels like, and this is staying lightly spoiler, not full spoiler, but he makes decisions that don't identify with the same passion and love he had for her minutes before, and it's like, why would that one thing change everything enough? When you see the film, this will make sense. Why would that one thing change everything enough that you would be like, oh, I buy this escalation of stakes? There's the writing element that definitely undermines and undercuts some of the mysticism. And there's also a decision to not show some footage in the film until later in the film, but that footage is not nearly as rough and violent as what we've already seen in the film, so it causes that moment not to be jarring, and it's an essential part of the story. So there's a decision that undermines the impact of something that needed to be impactful for their love, for the Crow turning into the Crow, for deals made, and it just kind of overcomplicates the mysticism. And I know I've stressed that a lot, and I've spoken about it for like a minute now, but the first Crow's so beautiful because it's just about a profound sadness that won't let someone rest, that tethers him to the world and tethers him to this Crow.
But sometimes, just sometimes, the Crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right.
And instead, in this one, there's like 30 things. And I don't know, it just didn't have the same weight. Now, I do want to speak to how perfect Skarsgård is as a Crow, and his eyes are a James O'Barr drawing. There's frames in this where I'm like, man, that is the Crow. But instead of doing the traditional Crow style makeup, it is this new design, and I get reinvention, and I get trying to modernize, and I get that this is a different kind of goth. And I think that was a great bold swing. Again, don't make it Eric. But the art of James O'Barr is so reflected in Skarsgård's eyes, and that is really wonderful. But it's kind of a shame because they don't use the comedy tragedy mask style that is so tied to our world, but they allude to it multiple times in the film, and it almost feels like there's an Easter egg for us Crow fans about the mask, and then they don't use the mask, so it doesn't quite work. I do like the way the makeup is described in the film and the materials used for the new style face. That's cool and metal as hell and really modern goth. And I do like that the tattoos and stuff add this occult flavor that does tie into the little extra overcomplication. But overall, it's not enough to not have us thinking about how great it was when it was simple. And it's not enough to validate what the passion for the sadness does. It's also really interesting because the movie's a lot more violent than a lot of movies. But the death of Eric and Shelly is not as violent as the originals, and the actions that this Eric takes are more violent. So what I love about the first film is everything is so intensely violent and dark that what happens to them is so horrible that you feel you're completely justified in cheering for the Crow's actions and just taking out someone organ by organ alphabetically with his own knife. The whole gang gets taken out in a way that feels karmic. And in this film, it's just like, shoot them up and violent. And there's less artistry in that. And there's less of this passionate, like they deserve this, in part because it's not, everyone's just kind of on an even keel of violence. Whereas in the first film, there's that horrible, terrifying flashback that's so brutal and impossible to watch. And then you're like, they deserve this. And there's just a lot of characters that don't feel as interesting. I didn't find Danny Huston, I mean, who's as fascinating as Michael Wincott? No one. But Danny Huston's one of the most powerfully voiced and has one of the most presence of character actors working today. And I felt he was underused. And I also felt that FKA Twigs, who is so just captivating and just has this gravitas and whimsy at the same time. She's like light and floaty, but also like incredibly like gravitational. Like she's these two diametrically opposed things. And yet after the first act, I didn't feel that weight when she was mentioned. It's like as soon as that first act went away, that element was gone. And I don't know why, because in the first film, we barely know Shelly, and you still feel the weight of Shelly in the first film. So I think this movie could have been a really great goth love story if it was called something else. I think this movie could have even been a great The Crow movie if it was another Crow than Eric and Shelly. But because you're constantly thinking of the first film, all of the flaws I've listed aren't necessarily bad. They're just not The Crow, the original. And that's not this movie's fault, because this movie might lead Gen Z to discover the first film. But this movie on its own is not as good as the original, so it's handicapping itself by basically having that comparison. The movie itself, I gave, as a Crow fan, 2 stars. If this was just a goth love story or The Crow with other people, it might have been 2.5. I think 2.5 is more fair to the movie. I think it's a solid C. I think it is, and that's not a rave review. You guys watch my stuff and people always think I love everything. A C is passing. It's a passable film. It's something I'm glad to have seen. It's something that entertained. It's something that told an interesting story, but it's not changing things. It's not making my top 25 of the year. I'm going to do top 24 this year for 2024. It's not making that. I think it goes down to 2 stars, which is like a D+, C-, because they named American Shelly and this isn't their story. This doesn't feel like them. And I think that really affected the film. I think it overcomplicates things. I think the actor they cast in the purgatory element needed to have a little bit more gravitas. I had nothing against the actor. He did a perfectly fine job. They didn't shoot him in a way where he felt impactful. They didn't allow him to... They edited him a way that felt too staccato. They didn't give him time to breathe in that thing. So it's not on the actor. I think it's just the acting, the writing, the editing, everything else just didn't allow that character to be as impactful as I think he should have been as to his import in the story.
A crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes something so bad happens.
And I do want to give credit to Skarsgård. He had an impossible task that Brandon Lee is missed. And he did a really cool job embodying a crow. It wasn't Eric Draven. So I think the movie's enjoyable if you go in wanting to see a really cool gothic love story. I think the atmosphere in the film is fascinating. I think some of the action is dope as hell. I think some of the fight scenes, especially if you like gory fights, you will really enjoy. I think there are things worth watching in this film, and I think the film itself is worth watching. But it's a C. It's a 2.5 star experience. To me, The Crow is 4.5 stars. It's an A. I've only given 25 films 5 stars ever. Perfection is impossible, but there are 25 films I consider as close to perfect as you can get. This is a 4.5 star film for me. The original, this new one, 2.5. And that's if they hadn't called it The Crow with Eric and Shelly. You know, if this had not been that Crow, 2.5. But for me, it was 2 because I kept thinking of comparing to the first. So hopefully this answers a lot of your questions about what I thought of The Crow. I know a lot of people have asked for this review. I wish I liked it more. And I'm really glad to have seen it, and I'm glad I tried another Crow, because now I might watch the sequels, now that I've kind of ripped that Band-Aid off. Like I said, I've probably seen the first Crow 30 times. I watch it every Devil's Night. I love showing it to people. I listen to the soundtrack constantly. That Crow means the world to me. What Proyas built directing, what Brandon Lee brought to that character. I've dressed as the Crow for Halloween. That character means a lot to me. This movie, I enjoyed as a movie. I enjoyed as a gothic love story. But it wasn't The Crow. It was a Crow. And that's okay. But know that going in. All right, much love. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought of this movie. Let me know what your expectations were going in. Let me know what you think of the original, because I love it dearly. Let me know stuff. Let's have a conversation in the comments. If you like comic book news and reviews, as well as movie news and reviews, and especially comic book news and reviews, please join this page. Trying to get to 36K by my birthday. And I appreciate each one of you that has followed. Seeing this page grow, personal page grow, has meant a lot to me, because it means you guys want to be here with my voice, not just all the networks I work for. So thank you, truly, and I hope you have as good a time as I did with The Crow, or better. I really hope you enjoy it. We'll see how this does. I don't think it's going to do well on the Rotten Tomatoes. I don't think it's going to do well on the critic scores, but people might like it, and it might lead people to the original, and that's all I can hope for, is people discovering a movie that means a lot to me, which is the original, even if it's by way of one that feels a little more watered down, and a little more complicated, with some dope visuals and some cool sequences. All right, I'm just talking at this point. Much love. I'll see you soon. Bye.